111.
All of my lessons come with the same 3 promises. Number 1, I'll tell you what I'm going to tell you. Number 2, I'll tell you. Number 3, I'll tell you what I told you. I hope it helps. Rhetoric. This is where I tell you what I'm going to tell you. So, first, I'm going to go over what I went over. See previous lessons very briefly. Can't do without 'em, no! Next, I'm going to offer brief definitions that Aristotle provides for each of the 3 appeals, logos, pathos, and ethos. We will talk about Aristotle on logos, which is the appeal to reason or logic. Aristotle on pathos, the appeal to the emotions. Aristotle on ethos, the appeal to credibility or the character of the speaker. Speaking of which,
I meant to do that.
and a note about how to use some of the technical terminology we're learning about in the context of rhetoric. Here we go.
I'll tell you all about it. And if you missed it,
This is where I tell you what I told you I was going to tell you.
Tough guy.
So, very briefly, a couple of the highlights that we hit upon. Where Aristotle's two different definitions, well, two similar but different definitions of rhetoric that he offers in the text. The faculty of observing in any given case the available means of persuasion, and the power of observing the means of persuasion on almost any subject presented to us. It involves analysis. Lesson 1 also covered a couple of the ways that Aristotle thinks rhetoric functions. So it's communication that's successful in producing a desired or intended result, but it doesn't have to be 100% successful. It's not all or nothing for Aristotle. He says it's not simply to succeed in persuading, but to discover the means of coming near such success as the circumstances of each particular case allow. And then finally, Aristotle says rhetoric is a means to discern the real and apparent means of persuasion in a situation. So we see that rhetoric involves analysis. We also see that it involves, success or attempting success, right? Or at least coming near success or making things a little bit better through persuasion. And we also saw that he mentions quite a bit particular situations, because rhetoric is about context. Remember Kairos? No one thing is going to be persuasive across the board in all settings.
no dice.
It depends on the rhetorical situation, the audience, the purpose, the setting, the person speaking. So basically, I nutshell it as just saying that for Aristotle, rhetoric is about both the practice and the analysis of persuasion. So getting stuff done and thinking about getting stuff done.
Rhetoric. Credibility.
Before we get into any more of Aristotle's wording, let me apologize in advance for some of the sexist language that we're going to encounter. In ancient Greece, the only people who learned rhetoric were men, land-owning men. So we have to keep in mind that context, which, is problematic. Nonetheless, these are helpful ideas coming that are in a long couple thousand-year tradition that we can still learn from, as long as we just kind of tweak the wording a bit when we incorporate it into ourselves. When we're actually looking at his words and quotes, we use what he said, unfortunately. So he goes in a little more detail, and he says the three means of affecting persuasion. Again, the man, see?
Oh, please.
Nope.
Sorry. The person,
Ah, that's better.
who is to be in command of them, must be able to, one, reason logically. Logos, remember logic, logos, that was my mnemonic. To understand human character and goodness in various forms. We see goodness, right, in character, ethos, and my mnemonic is an ethical speaker, right? And three, to understand the emotions, to name them and describe them and know their causes, because if we do that, if we know what they are, we know how to cause them and when, we can use them in persuasion as long as we're ethical about it. And we can also use it to imagine how others might be persuading us, when they're appealing to our emotions. Anyway, so he says, pathos, the emotions. Again, I said sympathy, empathy for pathos. That's how I remember them.
Rhetoric.
Terminology, but it's essential, mean anything.
I'd like to take a moment to offer a terminology note about how to use the words logos, pathos, and ethos, at least at first. When people write about logos or pathos or ethos, they will assume that because it has an S on the end that it's a plural. So these are singular Greek words. That's why they have the soft S, logos. Some people say pathos instead of pathos, ethos instead of ethos.
Perfectly acceptable.
You want to avoid things like misnumbering, I suppose, verbs and saying like logos are instead of logos is. There's a difference between logos, like a logo, like a corporate insignia, and logos, even though they have the same root word, obviously. So I start with logos, and that's means logic or reason. And here's an example. The doctor offered appeals to logos that helped Joe stop smoking, like statistics demonstrating increased risks of cancer. The next bullet is pathos, emotion or feelings. Example, the ad campaign consists of nothing but appeals to pathos that shame people into hating their natural bodies. And ethos, Greek term denoting credibility or the character of the speaker. And the example is, the candidate's strong appeals to ethos might help voters recognize her ability to lead. One final note is that you'll notice that throughout my slide presentation that I put these Greek words in italics. That is the standard practice for most academic style manuals. When words are still part of another language, we put them in italics. Also, you don't need to capitalize them all the time unless they start a sentence. So I hope those tips are helpful to get you started on using these terms in the context of rhetoric.
Rhetoric. I promise you, I promise. One more time.
This is where I deliver on promise number 3, and I tell you what I told you. We went over a very, very brief reminder about rhetoric. We went over Aristotle's brief definitions of the 3 appeals, logos, pathos, and ethos, and a note about how to use some of the technical terminology we're learning about in the context of rhetoric. There's going to be more lessons on the way. They are going to go into some of the appeals individually.
Sweet, 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 sweet.
Thanks for coming by.
Rhetoric.
What's the 411, huh?